What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode in the Ask Me Anything series. The first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs is officially over, so there is no shortage of things to talk about, and as always, you guys absolutely killed it with the questions, so I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to each and every one of you who took the time to come up with a question and either leave it on the community tab post on YouTube or send it in on Twitter. Even if your question is not featured in the video, just know I read every single one, and I appreciate all of you guys. If you guys enjoy this series and you want another episode in the next couple of weeks, then be sure to leave this video a like. That is the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button. And with that being said, let's go ahead and kick things off with the first question from Hockey Zone, who says, which first round series do you think was the most entertaining? Kind of an obvious answer here, but I think I have to say the two series that went the distance, the two 7-game series, Dallas and Vegas, and especially Toronto and Boston. So much drama heading into that Game 7 between Toronto and Boston. Was it going to be Boston choking away a 3-1 lead in the first round for the second consecutive year, or was Toronto going to lose, I think, their 6th straight Game 7? And then go figure, heading into Game 7, you have the Leafs goaltending drama with Joseph Woll getting hurt and Samsonov starting, and then the game going to overtime, just the maximum amount of drama. And then another series I'll mention, Vancouver-Nashville had some pretty entertaining moments, like Vancouver winning the series in Game 6 with a late goal from Pius Suter, and then they had the comeback earlier in the series, scoring a couple goals late to tie it and then winning it in overtime. So that series was kind of a weird one for me. It had some really entertaining moments, like I said, but for the most part, like, there was long stretches of those games where there was just nothing going on. So overall, I think the first round was pretty entertaining. I was worried when it was 3-1 Boston and when Vegas was up 2-0 in that series that we may not get any Game 7s, but we ended up with 2, and it made for a very fun weekend of watching hockey. Moving along now to the next question. This one comes from Sharp86, who says, a couple of weeks ago marked 5 years of Eiserman being GM. What are your overall thoughts on how he has done throughout the last 5 years? And also really appreciate the support, and I'm glad you enjoy the videos. I think overall, Steve Eiserman has done a solid job throughout his tenure so far as Red Wings general manager. I know there's a lot of Red Wings fans out there that just can't seem to criticize any move he makes and thinks he's the greatest GM of all time. I'm not one of those Red Wings fans. Not everything has been perfect. There's been some moves that he made that have aged poorly, but I do really believe the positives outweigh the negatives by a pretty good margin. The Red Wings over these last couple of seasons have been able to improve consistently year after year. They just missed out on the playoffs this season, you know, their last possible game. They won their last 3 games of the regular season in dramatic fashion. They took care of their own business. Unfortunately for the Red Wings, Washington did as well, and they won out their last few games. This is a Red Wings team that is competitive right now, and they still have what I think is a top 5 prospect pool in the league. The one thing people bring up a lot when it comes to this Red Wings rebuild is they were never able to land that, you know, franchise-altering superstar, at least yet anyways. Seider is great, Raymond is great, and Raymond showed flashes down the stretch. If he can play throughout an entire season like he played the last month or so of this year's regular season, then I think he could potentially be that guy for Detroit. And when it comes to the prospect pool, which, like I just said, I think is one of the best in the NHL, they don't really have that, you know, player who's expected to come in and be a franchise-altering guy. I mean, Axel Sandin Pellikka has the potential to, I think, but that still leaves the Red Wings, you know, without a true game breaker of a forward. So unless someone in the system currently unexpectedly blossoms into that guy, or maybe they draft someone, you know, in the mid-first round this year and get lucky and they turn into a superstar, I think Steve Eiserman is prepared to, you know, try to come out of this rebuild without a player like that. He's made it clear over these last couple of seasons, this season especially, that he wants to build a team that can roll 4 lines, have 4 lines that can score, and I think that's the way you have to do things if you don't have somebody on the roster like a McKinnon, a Matthews, a McDavid, or a Makar. Like I said, I don't think he's been a perfect GM. He's made some free agency signings that have aged pretty poorly. You know, Ben Sherratt, although he was a little bit better this season, that's not a good contract. The Andrew Cobb contract doesn't look great. The Justin Hall contract doesn't look great, and trading for Jeff Petrie doesn't look like a great move now. But again, overall, I do feel like the positives outweigh the negatives, and as a Red Wings fan, I feel pretty good about where the organization is at and where the team's headed. Moving along now to the next question. This one comes from Dominic, and it's kind of an expansion off of the last question. Where do you see Patrick Kane signing next year? I remember when this signing was made, Steve Eiserman got some heat for it, but it turned out to be a fantastic signing. Patrick Kane, I think, blew everybody's expectations out of the water. He was a legit top-line forward throughout his tenure in Detroit, a guy who was around a point per game, made some unbelievable memories. You know, his return to Chicago where he scored the winner in overtime especially was something I'll never forget. As a Red Wings fan, I would love to see Kane come back on a 1 or 2 year deal, and I think the Red Wings would love to have him, but based off of the things he said in, you know, the end of the season media availability personalities and interviews and things like that. Just the way he was talking about his time in Detroit and talking about the fans, it sounded kind of like a goodbye. My prediction right now is that he doesn't re-sign in Detroit. I hope I'm wrong. If not, some teams that I think would make some sense. Obviously, he's always going to be tied to Buffalo. That's where he grew up. It's his childhood favorite team. I think it would be cool to see him return to Chicago and play with Connor Bedard for a year or two. I don't think that's off the table. I think it all really just depends on what Kane's priorities are at this point. He's, 35, 36. Does he want to go somewhere and compete for a Stanley Cup? I don't think that's his, only wish, because he wouldn't have signed with Detroit this year, I don't think, if that's the case. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what ends up happening with Patrick Kane, where he signs, but based off the way he played this season with Detroit, I think it's safe to say there's going to be a lot of teams interested. The next question we have comes from Blightful McDavid, who says, what is your playoff predictions looking like so far? What did you get right? What did you get wrong? I didn't do too bad on the first round. I went 6 for 8, so only got 2 series wrong. Unfortunately, the team that I had coming out of the Western Conference and making the Stanley Cup Finals is one of those series that I got wrong. Winnipeg, they only ended up winning 1 game, so that doesn't look great. My Stanley Cup Final is already chalked. The only other series other than Winnipeg that I got wrong was Vancouver and Nashville. I had Nashville winning over Vancouver, so I feel pretty good overall about how my bracket is looking. 6 for 8, not too bad, although my Stanley Cup Finals that I had on my bracket can't happen. My Stanley Cup winner, Carolina, is still in it, although they did lose game 1 to the Rangers, and the Rangers look great. I still got faith in Carolina. I'm interested to hear how your guys' predictions are looking, though, so let me know how your bracket looks after the first round down below in the comments. Moving along now to the next question. This one comes from Zenvol Lorenz, who says, who going into the playoffs did you have a lot of doubt in, but now you're pretty high on? It sounds kind of crazy to say this, considering they just won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago, but for me, it's actually Colorado. Again, I had Winnipeg advancing that series, going all the way to the Stanley Cup Final, and outside of game 1, that series really wasn't close, and Colorado was just clicking on a completely different level. My big concern for the Avalanche, heading into that series, obviously I thought Winnipeg had the clear edge in net, but outside of game 1, Georgiev actually looked really good. I also had some concerns about Colorado's depth, if McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar and those guys aren't producing, where are they going to get offense from? But the Avalanche depth actually stepped up and were very good in that series against Winnipeg. Middlestat, Nichushkin, Lehkonen, those guys played fantastic. Zach Parise and Miles Wood both scored a couple of goals, and as per usual, their superstars, McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar, they all played like superstars. 9 points for each of them. McKinnon and Rantanen especially just continue to dominate in the playoffs, and statistically by points per game, they are some of the greatest playoff performers that the NHL has ever seen, so I'm not sure why I thought that, if they're not producing, where's Colorado going to get offense from, because those guys are just always producing. So I think Colorado would definitely have to be my answer for this question. Like at this point, seeing what they did against Winnipeg, I would not be surprised at all to see Colorado go all the way and win the cup this year. The next question we have comes from R376YT, who says, did Vegas change up their team too much at the deadline? They finished as a wildcard team by the end, and Dallas made a huge comeback in this series. Do you see Vegas finally having cap situations due to the guys they brought in, because they were all a pretty hefty price and take up a lot of cap space? After losing game 7 last night to Dallas and getting knocked out in the first round, there's been a lot of talk about Vegas. A lot of people saying that they choked and all this, and they did choke away a 2-0 series lead for sure, but like heading into this series, I don't even think a lot of people viewed them as the favorite here. Like Vegas came in as the 8th seed in the Western Conference, going up against the 1 seed, and I know on paper, Vegas, not your typical 8 seed, they're defending Stanley Cup champions as well, but I think them losing this series isn't really as much about Vegas, choking as much as it is the Dallas Stars are just a wagon. Like this was a very tough matchup for Vegas. The Western Conference is absolutely stacked this year. I know that's a team that had Stanley Cup aspirations, especially based off of the moves they made at the deadline, but those moves are also going to help them, moving forward. Guys like Noah Hannafin and Thomas Hertl weren't just rentals. Those are 2 guys that are going to help them for many years moving forward, and Mark Stone said it in his end of the season interview, like that's what happens when you just squeak into the playoffs. They have to get better seeding during the regular season if they want to have a legit chance to, win another Stanley Cup. It's very difficult to come in as the lowest seed and, run the gauntlet and knock off all the best teams, especially, again, in a very stacked Western Conference. I know everyone likes to dunk on Vegas because of the cap shenanigans, and outside of their fan base, they're probably one of the most hated teams in the NHL, but instead of, just consistently dunking on Vegas, I think we do have to give Dallas their flowers and give them a lot of credit, because that's an unbelievable team. Moving along now to the next question from Tanner on Twitter, who says, seeing that we have basically all the round 2 matchups set, Who do you think advances to the conference final? Lots of people counting out my Bruins against Florida. I had actually planned on making a second round predictions video today, but the way the schedule was made, like yesterday, kind of threw a wrench into my plans because we had the Rangers and Carolina starting their second round series earlier in the day before Vegas and Dallas finished up their series and played their game 7. So I'm glad somebody asked this question, and I'll quickly run through my predictions here. I know you said a lot of people are counting out your Bruins against Florida. I'm not one of those people. In my bracket, I actually had this as a second round matchup, and I picked Boston to beat Florida and go all the way to the conference finals. So I'm going to stick with my bracket there and go with the Boston Bruins. I think they're going to redeem themselves after choking against Florida last year. Carolina and the Rangers. I know the Rangers won game 1 and are looking really good, but I want to stick with my bracket here. I had this second round matchup on mine as well, and I have Carolina winning the Stanley Cup this year. So I feel like it would be wrong to go against my cup pick here. I know the Rangers are looking great, but I'm sticking with Carolina. In the Western Conference, Edmonton versus Vancouver. I'm expecting this to be a lot different of a series than Nashville and Vancouver. I think there's going to be a lot of goals scored in this series. I'm going to go with the Oilers, who just look unbelievable. They made pretty easy work of the Kings in the first round. I do believe that Vancouver's probably going to give them a tougher time than the Kings did, but I still have Edmonton going to the conference finals. In the final second round series, Colorado-Dallas. Like, this is a coin flip for me. We just talked about Colorado earlier in the video, how that's a team that I didn't have a ton of faith in heading into the playoffs, and they kind of won me over with their performance against Winnipeg. I'm really looking forward to this series. I think it's going to be a close one. I guess I'll give the edge to Colorado, and I'll go with them just because I think, they have the advantage in terms of, the game breakers, the McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makars of the world, but I would not be surprised at all if Dallas wins this series. Don't get me wrong. So those are my predictions for the second round. I'm going to go with the Avalanche and Oilers being the Western Conference Finals matchup, which is a rematch of a couple of years ago, and then in the East, Boston and the Carolina Hurricanes, which I think is also a rematch of a conference finals from, I think, maybe 2019 when the Blues won the cup. And now finally finishing out this episode with another question from Twitter. This one comes from Papler, who says, what's your thoughts about the Marner situation? Is he gone? Is he staying? I saved this for last because I know there was some people that got a little bit upset with how my last Ask Me Anything episode went. We talked about the Leafs a lot, but listen, this is a hot topic right now. We got to talk about it. The Leafs did end up losing the series, and there's been a lot of trade speculation already when it comes to Mitch Marner. What does the future look like for him? He's heading into the final year of his contract next season. He had some pretty interesting things to say in the end of season media availability today. It sounds like he wants to remain a Leaf. He said that is the goal, to sign an extension in Toronto. And listen, if he doesn't want to leave Toronto, then he's not going to. He has a no move clause. Any trade, any hypothetical trade has to be okayed by Mitch Marner, and if he wants to stay, then the Leafs can't really do anything about it. He is eligible for an extension on July 1st, so I imagine him and the Leafs will be talking. Maybe we see a sign-in trade if the Maple Leafs do end up trading him. I really do think that this core needs a shakeup, but it's just tough when you have guys, like a Marner with a no move clause. Obviously, you're not trading Matthews, you're probably not trading Tavares with that contract, not a very, appetizing deal to take on from, another team's perspective. And then William Nylander, you already signed him to that massive extension, so you're probably not going to trade him either. To be honest, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities at all to just see the core four back next season and to see all of them remain in a Maple Leafs uniform. I know there's a lot of Leafs fans out there, the thought of no big changes coming makes them want to, look in the mirror and already put on the Joker face paint, but it's a tough situation. I don't really envy Brad Treliving right now. I think there is going to be a head coaching change. Wouldn't be surprised to see Shanahan on the outs as well, but when it comes to, all the big forwards, I'm getting the feeling that they're all going to be back and still be Maple Leafs next season. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. Like I mentioned at the start, if you guys enjoy this series and you want another episode next week, then leave the video a like. That is the best way to let me know that you enjoyed. It helps the video get pushed out there more. Again, huge thank you to every single one of you who took the time to come up with a question and send it in. I know there's some people that, get a little bit frustrated if their question isn't picked, but just know I read them all and I really do appreciate all of you guys. And if you're new here and this was your first time checking out the channel and you want NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button and I will talk to you all again soon.